Welcome to As I Live and Grieve, a podcast that tells the truth about how hard this is. We're glad you joined us today. We know how hard it is to lose someone you love and how well-intentioned friends and family try so hard to comfort us. We created this podcast to provide you with comfort, knowledge, and support. We are grief advocates, not professionals, not licensed therapists. We are you. Today we are speaking with Melissa Pennell. Melissa is a writer, podcaster, and life coach living in Northern California. She has a keen interest in understanding the human condition and communicating how we can navigate a world that is at once beautiful and terrible. Her written work has been featured in publications such as Tiny Buddha, Elephant Journal, and Her View from Home. She's the author of Questions You'll Wish You Asked, a keepsake journal for mothers and daughters, which stemmed from the grief of losing her mother before asking important questions. She'll soon be releasing an accompanying journal for mothers and sons. Hi, Melissa. Welcome to our podcast.
Hi, I am so happy to be here with you ladies. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's our pleasure. Melissa is a podcast sister, so to speak, and we're excited to have her join us today. Before we get started, Melissa, would you please offer our listeners a bit of your background?
Sure. Yeah. So I am a life coach. I am a podcaster. I am obsessed with my cats. I am a mother. I'm a daughter. I'm all of those things. And most of all, I think first and foremost, I'm a writer, which is interesting to say that in front of my relationship roles, but I've been a writer since I was a little girl, since I knew how to write. And I write on a blog and I write for different publications, mostly about how to navigate a world that is wonderful and really difficult, and how to do it even if you're an overthinker. I think way too much. So I have a lot of insight there. Or maybe you're kind of negative, like how to have a successful life even while going through it with some challenges. And I'm also a griever, or someone who has experienced a fair amount of grief. I lost both of my parents by the age of 29, and I was really close with my mom specifically. She's the one I lost at 29, and that really informed my worldview. So it really touches how I write and speak and coach. And what also inspires me, I think it's also a gift, right, to have visited that place. So yeah, I think that loss and becoming a mother are some of the unique lenses from which I come to these different roles. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you. What's the name of your podcast?
It's called Follow Your Fire, Wild, Purposeful, and Tamed Life. So it's a little bit of a mouthful, but if you just look up Follow Your Fire, it should be the top hit. Yeah.
Great. I'm going to check it out.
Oh.
Thanks. We actually connected through podcasting. And when I checked a little further, like I always do, I was delighted to find something that you had created. You have published a writing journal, and the title is Questions You'll Wish You Asked, a time capsule journal for mothers and daughters. My thoughts immediately went to the letters that moms, if time and circumstance allow, sometimes write to their children with the idea that their children won't read them until after the mom is gone. My mom left one. I actually read and reread it so many times it eventually disintegrated. So, Melissa, tell us about this journal.
I have to just ask you really quickly. You say it disintegrated. Did you get a copy of it first? Do you have anything left of this letter?
No, only the memory of the words. That's all. That's all I have.
Yeah. Which I imagine after rereading it that many times, it's still stuck, very well to your heart. And
right.
And really, as we talk about the journal I published, that's the risk of anything that's like an object we hold in our hands, is we never know if we'll hold on to it forever. But I do think that I wanted to create something like that really, anyway, it's a journal for mothers to write in for their daughters. And these daughters could be in their 70s, right? Maybe towards the end of the mother-daughter relationship. And I say that like the living relationship. Or maybe this is a mom who just found out she's pregnant with a daughter and wants to write to her while she's still in utero. And it's really a journal that is largely about mom. It's also about, what do I want to leave to my daughters? Like, how do I want them to approach life? But a lot of that sort of begs the question, like, how do I approach life, or how do I want to approach these different issues? So it's a lot of things that tell us about, get to know your mother in a new way, in ways that maybe you wouldn't have thought to get to know her without considering that she won't be around all the time. I think that was when I wrote it, that was my thought. And I wrote it from the grief of not having my own mom around to ask these questions.
Right.
So it was really from this place of, what do I want my daughters to know? What might they one day care about? Maybe they won't. Maybe they could care less. For someone like me who loves to write, I'm like, I'll probably have daughters like that. But just in case they do, what might they want to know? So yeah, it's a lot of get to know you questions for mom. And it's something that, of course, daughters read while mom is still alive. If anything, that can be kind of fun. I've had people say that they'll just open the book over dinner and ask a question, jot down some notes later, but it'll just kind of open conversations about, our moms are these figures that we only know as mom, like, oh, parent, but they're these deeply complex, interesting, for someone like me that's just interested in people that were people long before us. And I think this book sort of speaks to that, like, who was mom before me? Right?
Yeah. You don't usually think of that stuff.
Wow.
When I mention writing to someone, a frequent response is, I can't write, or I hate to write. It seems to me, though, that this journal serves as a series of writing prompts. Can you give us a sample question or two? Are they all serious questions? And where did you find the questions that you wanted to ask?
Yeah. I feel like I have been thinking of questions since my mom died. And these are questions I might have even asked her when she was alive, but I just don't remember the answers because they weren't yet so important to me. So, going through life, as I said, I don't know if I said this actually, this journal was born during early pregnancy. I'm very pregnant now. I'm full term, due any day. But this journal came to be in the beginning of pregnancy. And it was largely because I was thinking about, like, gosh, I wish I could ask my mom, how long was your labor? What was it like preparing for a second kid? Because I'm kind of terrified, just and that question actually isn't even in there, but it sort of reminded me of just all the things I wish I knew. So so to answer that, they're not all serious. There's definitely some lighter things in there. Things like, what is a concert you'll never forget? And hopefully mom can think back to, like, really fun, crazy, or, whatever it was, that meaningful musical concert that she went to. Or another one is, what is an embarrassing moment for you? And how did you recover? Because those are usually, in retrospect, they're kind of funny. In the moment, they're horrendous, but it might be kind of fun to revisit that. So there's definitely some lighter ones. Like, something I put in there that I think is interesting is, did you have a favorite hiding spot as a child? And that's because I feel like it asks us as mothers or women to go to that childhood self and remember the curtains at grandma's house, or the bushes behind, in the back of the backyard.
Yeah.
So yeah. And then there's deeper ones for sure. There's definitely, they go all across the spectrum, but one question is, what was a really difficult part of your life and how did you get through it? And another one is, when you're gone, how do you hope to be remembered? And this is one of my favorites, although it's a bit morbid to some, but because I'm on a grief podcast where we're talking about loss, which is why I love this podcast, is the question is, if you could choose your last words to me, what would they be? Because how neat would that be to be able to choose what echoes in our children's head? And I lost my mom unexpectedly, and loss is difficult regardless of how it happens.
Right.
But I always wonder, like, I wonder, but I also kind of know they would have been, I love you. And just to have those written down, or like kind of solidified somewhere. So yeah, they kind of go all over the place.
Yeah. Yeah, I think my mother's last words might have been, I left you a note, because she always left notes. She should have bought stock in the Post-it company. She had notes everywhere.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Yeah. I can only imagine how I might have felt to receive a journal like that from my mother, a keepsake journal like that. It would be so precious to discover details about your mother that likely never popped up in daily conversations, especially with life as busy as it is today. so often we get caught up in the, can you take me here? Can you take me there? I want to go to the mall or whatever. We get caught up in all that. And sometimes we don't really get that chance to ask those questions. So is there a general focus or theme? Is your book maybe divided into sections, for example?
Yeah, it is divided into sections. And that was on purpose because I had such a variety of questions, and I'm sure some sections will be more interesting to some people than others, which is another reason I included that. So there are, and these are always directed to mom, since mom's the one answering these prompts. So there are questions like on childhood, on love, on work, right? Sort of like, what are your beliefs in these different areas? What's on our family? That's another one that, having lost both my parents and really not having any living elders, I'm always like, gosh, what was my, I don't know anything about my grandparents or stuff that, again, maybe was said over dinner one night and just ran away in your brain because you just didn't think about it being important. But years later, you're like, where did my grandma grow up? I don't know, stuff you can't find on genealogy sites. So
right.
Yeah. And then there's a section on spiritual life. One of the questions I have in there is, what do you think happens when we die? And what do you hope happens? Which I realize for me, I think part of the point of this book too is that it asks us to get to know ourselves on a deeper level. Like again, we don't know if our kids will be interested. We don't know if the book will burn in fire, God forbid, in a year. But when we're answering these questions, it does, for one, just ask us to reach within ourselves, as the person filling them out. But I think it also asks us to reach for our higher selves because, like, for example, one of the questions, if I didn't already mention this one, is, what should I do when other people are judging me? I think I misphrased it. The book says it a little more delicately than that. But, what do I do when people are judging something that I'm doing? And I think a lot of us have many reactions to that when we feel judged, especially as mothers. I think at any stage, it's easy to point the finger at moms or to feel judged. And what that question does is it asks us to pause and say, well, what do I want my daughter to do? What would be like the high road, so to speak? And I got to answer, one of the things there is to really get to know your own inner guide, your own inner self. Find people around you that you really trust so that, if everyone is pointing the finger, you have that solid group around you to help you stay centered. But I guess it kind of asks mom to reach for that higher self too, because then when I feel judged for something I'm doing, which is common, I get to say, well, okay, instead of getting defensive here or even thinking this person is right, what did I tell Tilly, my daughter? What did I tell Tilly to do in that book? Maybe I should try and do that, sort of.
Yeah.
Giving us a chance to be our best selves, right?
Yeah. So I'm going to play devil's advocate. I am the mother of 2 sons, and this journal is for daughters. What about the boys? Many boys have a very close bond with their moms too. And could this journal be for either daughters or sons?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that because I actually struggled at the outset of publishing it because I didn't want it to be exclusionary. Is that the right word? I wanted it to be something that mothers of sons and maybe even parents and children could do. I decided to stick with mothers and daughters because that was where my heart led me.
Right.
When I wrote this book, I was trying to write a book for my coaching business. I had decided to write a book about how to find your inner guide, and I even had most of it written, but it didn't want to be written. It just felt flat and really heavy. And the way that I feel when I create stuff is usually the way people feel when they read it or consume it. So I was like, this isn't supposed to be written. So all of that to say, I decided to just kind of gift this to myself and my mom and my daughters. I had just found out I was pregnant with another daughter. But when I wrote it, I actually wrote it very gender neutral. So the inside is largely applicable to, I only changed a few small questions because I think that just like you said, a lot of mothers and sons have this really strong bond. And I think they're going to want to know a lot of the same stuff. And there's a lot of the same ideas and hope that you're going to have for your son as your daughter. So the inside of the book isn't going to change much, but I'm actually about to publish one for mothers and sons. That's the long way to get to that answer.
Great.
Because even though it is gender neutral, I know that a son isn't necessarily going to stop by this, book for daughters with flowers all over it and get it for his mom. So yeah, it's really close. Because I self-publish, it's quite a process. And as I mentioned, I'm very pregnant and sort
Yeah.
of up against the baby clock, but I think it's going to be out. I see it being released by early April
Wow.
because it's done,
Yeah.
designed. Now I'm just waiting for the proof in the mail where you make sure it's not halfway off the page or things.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'll have to keep an eye out for that because I'll definitely have to get that and try to fill it out for my boys. And hopefully it won't make me cry through the whole time I'm writing it.
You know, it might. I kind of hope, not the whole time. I hope it'll make you cry a little because I feel like moments are the really, really raw ones, you know?
Yeah.
So I'll definitely send you a copy when I
thank you.
get one myself. So
yeah.
I'd love to.
Do you have any, are there going to be a few more questions in the book for sons that might differ from what you have in the book for daughters?
Yeah, I wrestled a lot with this. It's actually the only reason there was such a time difference between the release for daughters and the release for sons. And the answer is no, there's not a lot of huge differences because that first book didn't really emphasize, you know, I think I wasn't just trying to keep it gender neutral. I was trying to keep it very inclusive. So let's say a daughter might be married to a woman. So I wasn't saying things like, you know, what should I look for in a husband? Because I don't know that daughter will want to have a husband. So I did, this was something that I struggled with, but I'll just share it here. I asked a question in the Journal for Mothers and Daughters about how do I phrase it? It's about body and self-image. What do you want to pass on to me about beliefs about my body and my self-image? And even though part of me wishes that wasn't even in there, because I really hate that as women, we even think about our bodies as much as we do. It's part of, I think, the conditioning of our culture.
Mm-hmm.
The truth is, that's something I struggled with for years, is being highly insecure. It's something my mother struggled with. She was overweight her whole life. It really informed her every part of her life. So I think I left that in there in this sort of indignant, like, I don't want you to think about your body. But because I know society will likely ask you to, or maybe already did, this is what I want you to think. And that was actually part of what I said is, I want it to be the least interesting thing about you. You know, I want you to think of you as a mother or a writer I guess I bring that up because then when I was doing the journal for sons, I was like, I don't know that I think this might seem a little like feminine. And really, men do struggle with body image, just not at the level that women do, at least in our Western culture. So I took that question out and I replaced it with maybe a little bit selfishly something I would love for a man or person to think about, which is, what beliefs would you like me to have about being a good relationship partner? Because it's also something I wouldn't. Do you like that as a mother of sons?
Yeah. Yep.
I cleared it with a couple because I'm not a boy mom. I cleared it with a couple of my boy mom friends. And I think it's something we don't often ask our boys, or maybe we didn't used to, right?
Right.
And it's a great question because it's sort of something that as women, I think we're conditioned to think about a lot. Mm-hmm. I think I'm accidentally getting on my feminist soapbox. I don't mean to do that, but but it's something I think about a lot. And it definitely did. Like I said, most of the book could be man, woman, boy, girl. It really doesn't matter. But yeah, those are some differences.
Yeah, I had, as a side note, I have to say that with boys, I mean, I grew up with a sister. It was my mom who's a single parent, myself, my sister. I grew up in a house full of women. And then for a while we lived with my grandmother too. So, and now I'm living in a house full of men. It's my husband and my two boys. So it's like, whoa, what am I going to do with this? But, yeah, but, I figured it out. And I think letting my boys know, apparently I've done something right because recently, I won't get into specifics in case anybody who knows him listens, but he has learned, I mean, he's 17. I mean, that any of the teenage years are difficult. And he learned to stand up for himself. And he was like, you know what? That's not how I want to be treated. End of story. And I don't feel bad about it for sticking up for myself. And that was just like a wow, you know, like was I ever like that at 17 or did it take me until my 30s? No, yeah, it took me to my 30s to really get that. And I'm like, okay, so I'm doing something right and he's listening or he's watching, you know? So
good job.
Yeah,
Mom.
it's awesome. It's awesome to see those little things. But yeah, you're taken aback. You're like, oh, okay.
oh, this is a little person that I raised. Look
Yeah.
at this person
Yeah.
out there. I say little, but like he's a man in the world and he's standing
Yeah.
up for himself. And that actually reminds me of a question. One of the questions is, what are you most proud of me for? As in mom answering that for child. And that just already strikes me as like, you can stand up for yourself. Like
Yeah.
how much more fulfilling does it get as a mother?
Right. Right.
I was going to say Stephanie is a great mom.
Wow.
She really is. She
Thank you.
really is.
Okay.
And Kathy, as her mom, isn't that something that is another point of pride that you, I'm not
Absolutely.
trying to be like, look how great we all are, but
No.
it's like, what a fulfilling moment to realize you raised someone who's a fantastic human creator for the
Yeah.
next generation.
Well, especially when I consider a lot of the struggles we went through and how difficult pieces of our lives were.
Yeah.
It makes me especially proud
Yeah.
of that. Yes.
Oh, I love that.
And coincidentally, you're going to love this. A package just arrived at my door, and I know it's the copy of your book.
Oh,
Really?
I know it's there. It's
that's
out there.
bizarre.
How funny. We're on this call like an hour out of the week, and that's when the package arrives.
Right.
I know that's what it is. Yeah.
Well, I know you're more than an author, Melissa. You're a life coach. Do many of your clients that you work with suffer from grief, whether it's loss of a loved one or other life situations?
That's a good question. I think that they do, but not in a recent sense. I don't think I have really worked with many people who suffered a recent loss, but I do find that people tend to gravitate toward me that, for one, I think life itself is loss. I think we can all agree over and over, whether it's pets or jobs, not to put those on the same level as, loved ones all the time.
Right.
But I think people who are familiar with my writing or what I talk about, I like to kind of stay in the life is really hard and there's ways to make it really beautiful. Not life is so positive and let's just get over it. And so by having that sort of approach, in turn, I think I attract people who do have some darkness, but in this really beautiful, what are we going to do now? Okay. So like my life has been really difficult. And now what? So yeah, I guess the answer to that is yes. But yeah, as far as I'm not necessarily like a grief coach or work specifically on grief. It's more of like a peripheral part of the people that I work with.
Should you have someone that maybe they're grieving from a recent death of a loved one or something, are there exercises you offer them or options you offer them? I know probably writing, keeping a journal might very well be one of them. But do you offer things like meditation, yoga, or do you take like a different approach in your life coaching?
Yeah. Well, again, I don't necessarily coach people who are coming to me, with that as the main issue.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I tend to attract them in some form. So I do have sort of a little tool bag of like things that I think help so much. And you're right. Of course, writing is up there. It's so cathartic. And I think you said earlier, not everyone likes to write. So I respect that. I have more stuff, but something I have recommended because someone recommended it to me when I lost my mom is getting out a picture of your loved one, putting it, on your desk or right next to you, getting out a candle and lighting the candle and then writing to them. Like it's sort of, I think the trifecta of those things invites this presence, even when I was in the depths of my grief where I didn't really believe in God right after my mom died. I didn't think she was with me. I didn't think but something about this exercise, it conjures something, I think, within us. So I recommend that. I think that the simplest way to say this is like allowing yourself to really deeply grieve and feel your feelings. And the way I did that is I would get outside to a place where I was completely alone, or so it appeared, if that's possible. Hopefully if you're not in the middle of a metropolis. Or you know what? Get in your car and scream and cry and wail. I think the physical outcome of really just allowing yourself to break down is so healing. Kind of like, as mothers, we see our kids have these complete breakdowns. And luckily, it's something that I know to be like, yes, get it out. Even if it's over your cereal spilling on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're adults, we don't get to have those really cathartic moments. So I would say that. And talking to someone, right? A counselor, a therapist. I love tapping, emotional freedom technique. That's
Right.
cool. I do practice that with my clients. It's something that it just kind of awakens, again, the physical self alongside the cognitive self, which I think is where real healing can happen. And something else that was hugely helpful to me that I want to mention is when my mom died, she loved this poem that I had shown her. We don't even know if Mother Teresa actually wrote it, but it's like credited to Mother Teresa. It's called Do It Anyway. And she wanted me to paint it onto her wall. And I had said, like, I'm sure in a moment of hope or aspiration, like, yeah, I'll put it on your wall. I'll put it on your bedroom wall. And I just kept putting it off. And I was very selfish in a lot of ways towards the end of her life, but I just never did it. And then she died. And I remember just feeling so like I'd failed her. And this became like a sticking point. Like, why didn't I just paint that poem on her wall? Why didn't I even just like print it out? I just remember sharing this with my counselor at the time. And she was like, why don't you do it? It's funny. The poem's called Do It Anyway. I just put that together. And she didn't even go paint it on her wall because that wasn't even her wall anymore. My brother took over her house.
Yeah.
She just meant, what if you make something with that poem? And I did. I ended up making this big poster board of the written poem and then getting it laminated and then taking it to her grave. It wasn't huge, just like setting it there. And so I guess I'm sharing that to say our relationship with this person that we loved or animal, it doesn't end just because they're gone.
Right.
Our side of it, we're still alive. We still have these maybe promises or thoughts or memories that are funny or whatever it is. And I don't know how to exactly package that as a tool, but I think just allowing ourselves that knowledge, like just because the person's gone doesn't mean that all of your ends have to be tidied up. I think that something I've heard you talk about on the podcast is, yeah, the relationship doesn't end itself. So
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll share that poem with you so that if anyone wants to read it, it's a really beautiful little poem that I think is so just wonderful for anyone to read.
I'd love a copy of it. I'd love a copy of it. I have one last question before we start to wrap up. And I know you have the Journal for Daughters and you have coming very soon a Journal for Sons. Are you going to do digital copies of these? Will they ever be ebooks that people can fill out on their computer and have an electronic file to pass along?
You know what? I just decided that I am. At first, I was like, this is a real tangible object. I want it to pass through hands and sit on a shelf. But I think that even as we talked during this conversation about the letter disintegrating, right, from your mom, or, I think it would offer it to a new crop of people. And I'm sure I could offer it at a lower price too. Not that the book is so expensive, but I want it to be accessible as maybe even just something that you could, again, open up at dinner and say, hey, mom, what was your favorite food as a kid? What kind of music did grandma and grandpa listen to? Like, I think that would be a really great idea. So the answer is yes. And though the Journal for Mothers and Sons should be soon, I know I'm going to have to reformat to do an ebook. And that will probably take more bandwidth than I'll have for a little while, for a few months, but that will come. So that's a great question. Yeah.
Yeah, because I was also thinking of people maybe that have arthritis. It's not easy for them to write, or even people with a disability that are not able to write, but they may have speech enabled on their computers or something. And this would kind of, as you say, make it accessible for a wider audience. So that thought just occurred to me as we were talking today. So I'm glad to hear that it's in your thought as well.
Yeah.
Melissa, it appears our time is almost done for today. Sad to say, because I love chatting with you. We want to give you a chance before we wrap up to make sure our listeners know how to contact you and also what else you might want to share with them. So please share your website and any other info you'd like to give them.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much again for having me on. This was such a treat. And the way to stay in contact with me that would be best is I've shared a few times I'm about to have a baby. So, but I will still be online and writing. And so I won't be coaching for a while. But if you would like to stay connected with me, and that would best be subscribing to my blog, which I'll share a link with Kathy and Stephanie to include. And if you subscribe there, then I send a weekly or biweekly email just about life or grief or, perspective on something that recently happened. It's also where I'll share the Mothers and Sons Journal announcements. Once I figure out how to do things like pre-release, and like, I'm such a new author that this is all still Greek to me, but yeah, this is something that if you would like to stay in the know, so to speak, so subscribe to my email list, and you can find that either in the show notes or at followyourfirecoaching.com. That's my website. So yeah, and I also have a podcast, as we discussed, Follow Your Fire, Wild, Purposeful, and Life. And I will be updating that periodically. So yeah, I think I just want to, again, thank you for letting me come on here and share this space, not just with you, but with your listeners, because I think it's as a podcast lover myself, it's such an intimate experience to share, to have these people in your ears while you're on your walk or on your drive to work. And with the state of the world, how busy we are, and also just how difficult things are. I'm just so glad that you're doing what you're doing, because I think being able to, I think it's Mary Oliver that has a quote, something like, "We shake with joy, we shake with grief. How miraculous that these two are housed in the same body." I think I misquoted Mary Oliver, so forgive me for that. But that we need spaces like this where we can hold the fact that life is beautiful and exciting, and the pandemic is maybe nearing an end, and like, what does that mean? And also things are still really hard, and we're all changed and different. And what do we do now? Not to mention all those who have lost loved ones. So thank you for what you're doing. That's a long way for me to say that.
That's okay. Thank you so much for saying that. We're going to be certain to include Melissa's information on our website, asiliveingrief.com, and also in the episode notes that come along with the podcast apps. Melissa, again, thanks so very much for being with us today. And to our listeners, wherever in the world you may be, at whatever stage in your grief journey you may be, know that we're with you. We've got you in our thoughts and prayers as we all continue to live and grieve.
Thank you so much for listening with us today. Do you have a topic that you'd like us to cover, or do you have a question from one of our episodes? Please email us at info@asiliveandgrieve.com and let us know. We hope you will find a moment to leave a review, send an email, and share with others. Join us next time as we continue to live and grieve together.